Counsel to the Chairman for Reform, and I have the pleasure of doing very brief introductory remarks today before we begin the actual program. I know we have a number of people joining us online as well. The reason for the workshop is to get thoughts and ideas as we make changes to our registration system, CORES. As you know, anyone who does business with the agency is required to get a registration number. And there's a real interrelationship between all of our systems and CORES, and the changes that we're making as part of our overall data improvement, data innovation initiative for all of our systems. Last year, at the end of last year, the Commission adopted and released a notice of proposed rulemaking seeking comment on changes that we have proposed to the system. The comment cycle for the first comments is closed. The reply comments are due March 18th, and this workshop is part of our gathering information that will be part of the record. The proposed changes that we made late last year were the result of our experience over the past decade or so since the system was in place, and also some informal feedback that we've gotten. But the workshop today and the comments and replies are to get more formal information on how those changes, the features and functionalities are going to affect you, and things that you want in the system and things that are important to you. Your input is really invaluable as we move forward, and I encourage you to be creative, to be forthcoming in your ideas on how we can best design and develop and deploy the new registration system. So thank you again for being here on this rainy morning, and I will turn the program over to Warren, and thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Beth. Good morning, and welcome to the FCC's public forum on the Commission's registration system, which is also known as CORES. My name is Warren Furshine, and I will be moderating this discussion here this morning. Now, we're holding this forum to give you, the public, an opportunity to comment on the potential modifications to CORES that were raised in that recent notice of proposed rulemaking last year. Now, copies of the NPRM are available on the tables on either side of the entry doors, and in addition, there is a sign-in sheet, and we hope that everyone will sign in to indicate their presence here today. Now, as you know, CORES is primarily used by registrants to obtain an identifying number called an FCC registration number, or FRN, which is used to easily identify individuals and companies when they interact with the agency, such as when they submit or file applications, as well as remit payments to us. Now, 3 months ago, the Commission released a notice of proposed rulemaking proposing modifications that are intended to make CORES more feature-friendly and improve the Commission's ability to comply with various statutes that govern debt collection and the collection of personal information by the federal government. One of the primary goals of this proceeding is to take advantage of recent technological changes to make it easier for individuals and entities to do business with us by improving the interface with CORES. This NPRM is also related to the development of the consolidated licensing system, which many, if not all of you, have heard of. Now, here to tell you a little bit about that is Jim Bradshaw, who is the Deputy Division Chief of the Media Bureau's Audio Division. Jim?
Thanks, Warren. Good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jim Bradshaw. I'm the Deputy Division Chief of the Audio Division of the Media Bureau. I'm also the Media Bureau's representative for the ongoing transition to the consolidated licensing system. For those of you unfamiliar with the Media Bureau, our primary focus is overseeing the television, radio, and cable industries, and my particular focus is with radio. I want to talk to you today briefly about some of the proposed changes to CORES put forth in the NPRM and how those changes will improve the anticipated transition to the consolidated licensing system and also improve the accuracy of data within the Commission. First things first about CORES. CORES is the acronym for the well-known Commission Registration System. The system assigns a unique 10-digit number, FRN, to a registrant that is doing business with the Commission. The Commission uses the FRN, among other things, to avoid revealing personal identifying information such as Social Security numbers. The Commission, through its various filing systems, uses these FRNs for identification purposes, to handle various licensing and enforcement efforts, in addition to associating various payments and debits to Commission licensees. CORES was originally designed to accurately assess and collect regulatory fees, track fines, and forfeiture actions, and to collect penalties. In 2001, the Commission mandated that all entities doing business with the agency were required to submit FRNs along with most types of applications and other submissions that were part of the licensing process. Since the creation of CORES and FRNs, their use has been expanded, but not always consistently within the agency. Both the Universal Licensing System in the Wireless Bureau and the International Bureau Filing System use FRNs to access their online systems. The Media Bureau's Consolidated Database System uses FRNs to ensure that applicants have authority to file applications for specific stations, but doesn't use the FRN as the login. Most systems rely on CORES for red light checking purposes, that is, to ensure that an applicant doesn't have any delinquent government debt. There are currently many different ways in which CORES and its data is used within the agency. To complicate matters, licensees and other Commission customers have been able to register multiple FRNs per entity since the system went online over 10 years ago, sometimes resulting in duplicative or inconsistent data. So as part of the Commission's effort to unify the way it does business across the bureaus and generally to bring more consistency and efficiency to its processes, the Commission has been working toward implementation of a new consolidated licensing system, or CLS. We have many legacy systems in the agency that use older technology, some technology that isn't even supported anymore, that are in need of modernization. CLS will hopefully solve those problems and more. Just a little background on the CLS. The plan is that it will combine the licensing processes of the Media Bureau's Consolidated Database System, the Wireless Bureau's Universal Licensing System, the International Bureau's IBFS, CORES from the Media Bureau, the Experimental Licensing System from OET, and the Antenna Structure Registration from the Wireless Bureau. The agency is also hopefully looking to transition the Wireline Competition Bureau's manual filing system for Section 214 applications to this new consolidated licensing system. And CLS will also provide access to other related systems such as call sign, KidVid, EEO reports, ownership filings, and other secondary systems such as these. Currently, these various systems collect similar data on similar forms. In some instances, the same entity is required to log into CDBS to file broadcast forms, the ULS to file broadcast auxiliary forms, and IBFS to submit earth station forms. So CLS, in conjunction with the changes to the CORES proposed in this item, will eliminate the need to maintain separate logins to these similar systems. And CLS is eventually going to handle the e-filing, data, procedural, authorization, and public access functions of all significant licensing systems currently within the agency and some that are not currently online. From a Media Bureau perspective, we are trying to accommodate 100% of our 100% of our current filings electronically, and the most prominent, such as sales and construction permits, down to the most simple filings. So what does all this have to do with the changes proposed to CORES in this item? Well, let me start with a brief overview of the proposals in the NPRM. For the same reason the Commission wants to consolidate its various licensing systems, it makes sense that we require all parties doing business with the Commission to be able to search and access information on CORES registrants by a single unique identifier. Therefore, the Commission has proposed several suggestions to either limit entities to use a single FRN in CORES or to associate differing FRNs for these same entities. The plan is to accomplish this goal while continuing to provide the flexibility of having multiple registrants within that FRN. The Commission has put forth two primary options to do this, in addition to asking for additional suggestions from customers to achieve this same goal. Option 1 would modify the structure of existing FRNs to incorporate a suffix that would allow entities to use a single FRN with sub-accounts for various authorized registrants. This would not only allow for access for larger organizations with subsidiaries or state and local governments with multiple FCC licenses, but it would also enable smaller organizations such as local broadcasters to provide tailored access to their consulting engineers or attorneys. This option would require any organization with multiple FRNs to select just one FRN to serve as its official FRN on a going forward basis. That FRN would then be used as a foundation for all of its future sub-accounts, which could take the place of numerous FRNs currently in place. Option 2 would enable our customers to retain all of their various FRNs, which would then be linked to each other using identical prefix. An applicant under Option 2 would be able to use all existing FRNs for his or her organization, and the Commission would use the prefix to associate all these differing FRNs for that particular entity. By limiting everyone to a single FRN or otherwise linking an entity's multiple FRNs, we would be able to construct what we call a dashboard within the CLS that would include all of an entity's Commission holdings, including licenses, construction permits, or other authorizations across the various bureaus, along with a summary of their upcoming deadlines, filing requirements, or other regulatory requirements. Without either eliminating these duplicate FRNs or otherwise limiting the existing sets of FRNs, providing access to licensee records in such a unified fashion becomes much more challenging, if not impossible. The NPRM also seeks comment on how the Commission should accommodate FRNs registered to individuals, and if individuals should be able to have sub-accounts just as corporations or other organizations would. Furthermore, it also asks numerous questions about how these accounts should be managed, how FRNs should be used across the agency, what type of information would be mandatory in CORES, who should have the ability to make changes and additions, and other details about the CORES process in general. It also talks about the creation of user IDs in CORES and alerting FRN holders of financial or other issues via the account, just to name a few. This NPRM is a critical first step for the Commission to move forward towards a more efficient and customer-friendly filing and public access system. I hope this item will be followed soon by at least one more rulemaking that will propose the consolidation and normalization of various rules, procedures, and ministerial issues across the various Commission bureaus. These items together will facilitate the implementation of the CLS and bring more consistency to processes across the agency. Implementing all these changes, whether the options enumerated in the CORES notice or possibly in some other fashion that has been put forth by commenters, will enable the agency to begin the process of eliminating its stovepipe filing systems and implementing the consolidated licensing system. In doing so, the Commission will be able to provide improved access to data, better service to its various customers, and more efficient processes all around. The Media Bureau looks forward to implementation of the changes proposed in the CORES NPRM.
Thanks, Jim. Now I'd like to call upon Phil Ferraro, who's the agency's Chief Information Security Officer, who will talk about some security-related issues, including how we plan to keep some of the information that is submitted through CORES safe. Phil?
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As Warren mentioned, I am the Chief Information Security Officer for the FCC. Among my responsibilities is to ensure the protection of the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the systems and the data that are stored within our networks. The data may be self-generated that we've created internally, or the data may be information that we've collected from the public through our web-based applications. Some of the proposed changes today, while they're designed to improve the processes and to be able to make it easier for you to do business with the FCC, but we've also added in some additional security measures to help better protect your data and your information that are stored on our networks. So we take very stringent measures here at the FCC to ensure that our data and our systems are protected. From web application firewalls to a very detailed defense in-depth system that we have here, we're particularly interested in protecting personally identifiable information, and that can be a number of different things, the aggregate of names, social security numbers, that type of information. And so we take extra measures to ensure that your data that is stored with us is very safe. And some of these proposed changes are going to incorporate additional security measures. So as you're considering and reviewing these different proposed changes and putting together your comments, please do consider these security options. So I'll just take a few minutes to talk about 3 or 4 of the different proposed changes, but I'm only going to discuss them from the security perspective, as there'll be further discussions on the specific features. So the first one, as Jim had mentioned earlier, is the forming a single FRN per entity. Now, this allows us to be able to tie together numerous business accounts and dealings that you have with the FCC into a single account. From a security perspective, if there happens to be an issue with a particular FRN, and there could be anything from, you may have any type of business adversary or maybe a disgruntled employee or former employee that has access to your FRN and or possibly the password for that FRN, wants to go in and create some type of changes, unauthorized changes, malicious activity, or maybe just an account where someone has your FRN but not necessarily the password, is making multiple attempts to try and get into your account for whatever reason. So whether we discover this malicious activity or you notice that there's some changes in there that you didn't make that are unauthorized changes, with all these different FRNs that are not all tied together, it makes it more difficult to do the security investigation, to find out, one, to isolate that particular incident, but also to see if any of your other FRNs have been affected similarly. So by going to a single FRN, it consolidates all your business dealings into one location so that if there happens to be a security incident, it makes it easier for us to respond and be able to check all of your information to make sure that all of your information is safe. Additionally, with a single FRN, it allows you to create basically a master account, an administrator for all your sub-FRNs, to be able to put them together and be able to control the access. So for example, if you have people within your organization who maybe you don't want to have access to everything, or you don't want to be able to make changes, you might be able to grant them with read-only permissions versus having full access on every single account. Additionally, to have that type of level of control on your FRN, on your master FRN. So on the dashboard that Jim had described earlier, it has all your information. You may or may not want everyone to see that information, and this gives you the ability to control that and gives you better security over your data. Another area is an elimination of some of the taxpayer identification number exceptions. One of my concerns that I have is with people entering in and creating fraudulent FRNs. So again, a disgruntled individual, former employee that wants to go in, create an FRN under your business entity for whatever reason they might have, requiring or reducing the number of taxpayer identification exceptions makes it more difficult to be able to create not difficult to create the FRN, but reduces the probability of having fraudulent accounts created. Making the use of email mandatory is another way to reduce the possibility of creating fraudulent FRNs. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have gone out to different sites, maybe CNN, Washington Post, others, where they ask for your email address, and then they want to be able to verify that, in fact, you are providing a valid email address. So by doing that, either once you put the email address in, then you automatically receive an email, and it might have a code in there, and you enter that code into the website, or you click on a link, and it goes back to the organization, and it validates your email address. So by doing this, by making the use of email addresses mandatory in your FRN, it provides another level of security so we can validate your account, but additionally, as changes are made, as we consolidate into a single FRN, we can track all of your business dealings in one location. When there are changes that are made to your account, you can receive email notifications so that you receive an email, yep, those are authorized changes, nothing more needs to be done. On the other hand, if there's changes that are made to one of your accounts or some of your information, you say, whoa, I didn't do that. Then you can contact us, and then we can start an investigation, we can look into it. So again, just another level of added security that's for your benefit to be able to protect your information and make sure that it's still correct. And then the last area is the use of custom user IDs. Again, this is another level of protection. Years ago, and we're required, there's regulatory guidance that requires us, such as the Debt Collection Act, to have your Social Security number. And so we created the use of the FRNs to be able to protect your Social Security number. So now we're taking the next step forward to protect your FRN by allowing you to create custom user IDs. This way, we don't have to worry about your FRN being compromised for some reason, but additionally provide us better audit and logging capabilities so that you can assign different customer or unique user IDs to each of your various sub-FRNs, all tied into your same master account. So these user IDs will allow us to better identify. So if you came back to us and said, there's changes in there that shouldn't have been made, or I didn't make those changes, we can go back into our logs and take a look and say, okay, this user ID accessed the system on this date. And then you can go back and you should know who that you've issued those custom user IDs to and password. So again, just another procedure that's in place. The custom user ID also just makes it easier for you, right? So I can log in as Phil Ferraro versus having to go in and find my 10-digit FRN or 10-digit with extensions. So it just makes it a little bit easier, but provides a lot of extra security for you. So these are just a couple of the ideas of ways that we're looking to not only improve the processes in our systems, make it easier for you to use, but at the same time, adding in extra levels of security so that better protects your data and your information. Thank you. Warren? Any other security-related questions that I might be able to answer for you? No? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to now take a few minutes to summarize some of the proposals that were made in the NPRM. Some of these Jim and Phil touched upon, so I'll go through these quickly. The most important proposal made in the NPRM would be the move to a single FRN. Now, since the creation of CORES, companies have been able to obtain multiple FRNs, sometimes so that they could better internally manage their dealings with the agency. As a result, however, as both Jim and Phil have explained, it has been difficult for the agency and for outside users searching our system to identify all the FRNs that are held by the same entity and tie them together in order to examine the entity's entire course of dealings with the agency. And here are some interesting statistics that we've discovered regarding FRNs at the agency, and I have a few slides. Okay, so how many FRNs are registered in CORES? This is interesting. There are actually 1.9 million FRNs that are registered right now. Now remember, CORES was up and running, I think, in 2001, so it's been about 10 years of time. We've gotten up to 1.9. On average, how many new FRNs are registered in CORES every year? Anyone want to make a guess? All right, the answer is, on average, we have about 100 to 110,000 FRNs per year. That number has actually been declining over time. When we first put CORES up, obviously there were much more initially. Over the last 3 years, we've averaged about 105,000. What percentage of FRNs in CORES do you think are registered to individuals as opposed to entities? And it's actually surprisingly high, at 70%, which is approximately 1.3 out of the 1.9 million FRNs in this system, which of course means that the number of FRNs that are registered to entities are 30%, or about 600,000. How many times have more than one FRN been registered under the same taxpayer identification number? Any idea? Out of those 1.9 million FRNs? All right, this was very surprising to me. Over 50,000. Over 50,000 times have we had more than one FRN registered under the same TIN. Now these statistics are a few months old. I think we researched this last summer, so it might be slightly different right now, but it's probably in the same ballpark. How many times have more than 5 FRNs been registered under the same TIN? 274 times. The largest number of FRNs that are associated with a common taxpayer identification number, 107. So you can see why we're interested in trying to ebb this flow and reduce everyone to a single FRN, or a system where multiple FRNs can be interconnected with each other. Now, if enacted, this proposal would have numerous benefits both to our regulatees and to the agency. For example, limiting each registrant to a single FRN would enhance our ability to inform them of past due regulatory fees and impending license renewal deadlines through email or possibly through online notification messages, which might happen through the dashboard that Jim spoke about. Again, as Jim discussed, it would enable the Commission to roll out a series of new features for CORES, including the dashboard that filers would see upon login, through which they'd have the ability to review the progress of their filings, fees that are due, the history of files that they've submitted, as well as any other important information. These sorts of features are only possible if we're able to somehow link all of an entity's FRNs together. And the NPRM also proposes to limit individuals to a single FRN as well, as Jim alluded to. Now, the NPRM does not make a tentative conclusion regarding the best method of accomplishing these goals. Instead, it describes a pair of methods that we're considering. And let's take a quick moment to go over them with the help of a few more slides. Now, as Jim explained, the way that the system currently works is that each FRN, each TIN can have as many FRNs as possible. Licenses are associated with particular FRNs. Now, the first option that we put forth in the NPRM is to allow users to create sub-FRNs underneath a primary FRN, a primary account. These sub-FRNs would be able to be created as desired by the company. You could create as many as possible, and the way that we envision them is that they would take the form of a 3-letter or 3-digit extension at the end of the 10-digit primary FRN. Now, for example, you could assign one of these sub-FRNs to different locations in large entities or different divisions or different individuals as you want. All right, so option 2, as Jim explained, would allow entities to keep all of their current FRNs and to continue to get as many FRNs as they want, but they would be linked together internally in our system in a way that's transparent to the user through some sort of identifier or some sort of prefix. If we would to go with this sort of option, your existing FRNs would not be altered and you'd be able to keep all of your already existing FRNs. And again, just like if we went with option number 1, you could assign different FRNs to different locations of your entity or different individuals or different divisions. As Phil alluded to, even if we went to this sort of system, one feature that we could implement was to make one FRN sort of a super FRN and to give it administrative rights of all the others that it is interconnected to through this common prefix. One question which is also open is whether or not to allow individuals to have multiple FRNs or sub-FRNs as well. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that individuals, let's say amateur license holders, might need additional FRNs. There are times when it may make sense. For example, you may have a case where an amateur license holder hires an outside attorney to take care of its regulatory filings, and they want this person to have a separate FRN or a separate sub-FRN just in case they want that they can terminate without having to change their entire FRN account. Current registration features. Right now, as we've spoken about, each FRN has its own user ID, which implies that if you have multiple users at a company who want to use the same FRN to make filings at the agency, you all have to share the same password and user ID number. And this is something that could change under our proposals. Now you could have multiple passwords for multiple users of a single FRN, and I think that's something that Phil spoke about just a few moments ago. Additional users would be barred from entering, changing, or even viewing certain information. That would be a terrific feature that we could add. And as Phil alluded to, each individual user could have their own user ID and password, even if they had the same FRN with the same sub-account. Finally, one more feature that we could add through this sort of system is to allow individuals to access multiple FRNs or sub-FRNs through a single login. one way we thought that this might be useful is, for example, outside attorneys who may have multiple clients, all with their own different FRNs. Through this sort of system, they'd be able to log into the system just once and be able to access and change the information for all of their clients without having to go through and logging out and logging back in every time they want to access the system. Okay, so that goes through our single FRN proposal. Now, in addition, the NPRM proposed to allow multiple registrants with multiple points of contact. Now, currently, CORES does not permit FRN holders to identify anyone other than themselves as the point of contact for their FRN, which really limits the FRN's usefulness to us at the agency because the listed person is not always the appropriate individual to resolve a particular issue or to provide necessary information to the FCC. So for that reason, the NPRM proposes that FRN holders would have the ability to voluntarily provide additional points of contact for their FRNs for certain issues, such as accounting issues, legal issues, and billing issues. Next, the NPRM proposed eliminating certain TIN exception reasons. This is something that Jim spoke about. As you know, some individuals and entities are not required to provide their taxpayer ID when registering in CORES for various reasons. In fact, according to our records, out of those 1.9 million FRNs that have been created, approximately 66,000 of those FRNs use one of our exception reasons to not provide a taxpayer identification number. Again, these numbers are a few months old, so now the numbers might be slightly more than this, but they're probably in the same ballpark. So out of those 66,000 FRNs, more than 23,000 are registered to individuals and 43,000 are registered to businesses. So over time, we have begun to believe that some of these exceptions are unnecessary, and the NPRM proposes to eliminate some of them. The most used exception is the exception available to foreign entities and individuals. Now, according to our statistics, approximately 10,000 business FRNs don't provide a TIN because they selected the entity is foreign exception reason, while 14,000 individual FRNs don't provide a TIN because they selected the individual is foreign exception. As Phil spoke about, there's the possibility of fraud in the selection of these exception reasons, and that we're concerned that some individuals may fraudulently decline to comply with our rule and provide a taxpayer identification number by claiming that they are a foreign entity or foreign individual when that is in fact isn't true. Therefore, the NPRM proposes to require foreign entities and individuals to provide either a tax ID or a foreign equivalent taxpayer ID which they received in their home country when registering in CORES. The NPRM proposes the elimination or restriction of some of the other exceptions as well, which we can get into later in the discussion section. Next, registrant email addresses. Now, when CORES was first designed approximately 10 years ago, the use of email, of course, wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now. And as a result, entities and individuals were given the opportunity to voluntarily provide an email address when completing the CORES registration process, but it wasn't mandatory. Now, of course, given the significant increase in the use of and dependence on email in the years since CORES was first implemented, the NPRM proposes that all FRN holders now be required to provide an email address upon registration. And this would simplify the process for us at the agency to maintain contact with registrants when the regulatory matter requires attention. And don't worry, your email addresses would remain private and hidden from view, as Phil spoke about earlier. Login procedures. The NPRM proposes two changes to login procedures. First, that users can customize their user ID, and secondly, that they can create their own individualized passwords, even if they share the same FRN. Next, using CORES to alert FRN holders about financial or other administrative issues. This is what Jim spoke about earlier. The capability to create a dashboard will enable us to provide you with information which otherwise would be more difficult for us to pass on to you efficiently. Tax-exempt indicator. This is another one of our proposals. Because tax-exempt entities, as some of you may know, often qualify for a reduction or elimination of their Section 8 or Section 9 annual regulatory fee requirement, the Commission is considering adding a field to CORES that would enable entities and individuals to indicate their tax-exempt status. The availability of such data and documentation through CORES would simplify the process for us to confirm your eligibility for reduction or exemption from these annual fees. Similarly, the NPRM proposes adding another field, which would be a bankruptcy indicator. In certain contexts, our various bureaus and offices have an interest in knowing when industry participants are filing for or emerging from bankruptcy. Now, for example, the Commission is required to process assignments or transfers of control of licenses for parties that enter bankruptcy. And also the Commission's Office of Financial Operations routinely receives requests for waiver of Section 9 reg fees from debtors claiming to be in bankruptcy. And when we get a request for waiver of these fees, our Financial Operations Office has to check to make sure they're eligible and that these parties are actually in bankruptcy. And currently, we don't have a central depository for this information. Creating this field and requiring entities claiming to be in bankruptcy to provide us with some sort of documentation would reduce the administrative burdens here at the agency and allow us to be told that there's been a change in their bankruptcy status. So that, in short, describes a majority of the proposals that are made in the NPRM. So what we'd like to do now is come to what's really the centerpiece and the reason for this forum to begin with, and that is to open it up to questions and answers. Now, I know we have some people that are following along on the web through WebEx on our internet site, and I understand that the people that are following along can submit questions through the interface. So I recommend that you do that, and we have someone staffing and monitoring the website right now, and they will bring those questions up to us as they are made. So let's begin with what's probably on everybody's mind: the proposal to limit entities and individuals to a single FRN. First, are you in favor of the proposal, the general proposal, to limit entities to a single FRN? And I just want to talk about entities first, and then we'll talk about individuals afterwards. Does anyone have any comments? Incidentally, as Mary Beth mentioned earlier, the initial comment period for the NPRM expired on, I think it was March 3rd, but we were still in the reply comment period. So as you think about these issues, there's still time for you to file reply comments up until, I think it's next Friday, March 18th. But of course, anything that you say here in this forum will automatically become a part of the record itself, and we will take that into account in coming up with solutions to some of the questions and some of the issues that were raised in the NPRM. So does anyone have any comments to make regarding the move to a single FRN for entities? Well, let me ask you this. Does anyone, would anyone have a preference between what we have called option 1 and option 2? Yes, sir.
Excuse me, my voice is a little weak today. As I understand the options, the first option is essentially what the Commission had before, back in the early days of ULS, where people were able to register a TIN with sub-accounts, and then that was replaced by the system of going to the individual FRNs. And that seemed to work at the time. I think going back to that system at this point would create a tremendous hardship on registrants in the system. There would be lots of questions about potential unauthorized assignments of license, transfers, moving different authorizations around under different FRN numbers. I'm wondering if from that perspective, I think option number 2 would be a lot simpler to implement and would achieve the objectives of the NPRM.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other thoughts, similar thoughts, differing thoughts on option number 1 or option number 2? Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, thank you. One issue that we were worried about, I don't know whether or not this is actually how you feel about this in the industry, is that one possible drawback to option number one would be how entities would handle cases when two entities in the industry merge, and so you have two different subgroups of FRNs that would now have to be merged together under a single major account, and so one of those sets of FRNs would have to be converted into sub-FRNs. So one thing we are wondering is whether or not that would be burdensome to entities in the industry, and for that reason you would prefer option number two.
Sorry to chime in again. In your analysis of duplicate TIN registrations resulting in multiple FRNs, did you determine whether this was an instance where you would have large companies that would use an FRN for like 1,000 different filing purposes, and then they would have a couple of sort of outliers that may have been set up once or only used a couple of times? Having worked with some large companies that have far-flung operations, where we run into situations of multiple FRNs being issued is where you have people sort of in regional offices who are creating FRNs for a very limited purpose. And actually that creates problems down the road because invariably they've left the company or nobody has the password, and et cetera. So that's, to me, where the major duplicate FRN issue comes up. But I'm wondering if that analysis was done to see if, where you have multiple FRNs, if one was used a lot more than the other ones. And secondly, if another situation that I'm familiar with is where an FRN for an entity, an entity has two FRNs, one for, say, licensing purposes and one for like 499 purposes, because those are handled by different arms of a company. I don't know if you were able to drill down to that level of granularity or not, but it'd be interesting to know what is the primary cause of multiple FRNs.
To my knowledge, we haven't done that sort of analysis, but maybe Corey, who works on the numbers, has some input on that. Corey, by the way, this is Corey Jerome. He's one of our internal people who helps manage the CORES database and has helped us come up with a lot of the statistics and the numbers.
Right. So in looking at the statistics, we were really just running numbers. We did run some numbers against licensing systems at one point, but I don't think we determined the type of use. I mean, we did look at how many were used versus abandoned, things that hadn't been used in quite a while. But in terms of, are some FRNs used for licensing versus other activities, we're not quite sure. We could tell that some companies use it for different lines of business, some use it for different regions, and there is a lot of variety of how they divide up FRNs for a single entity.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, as far as either implementing option one or option two, I've found out that there have been times when I'm representing a new client and I'll ask them for their FRN password, and they haven't done any filings in a while. They have no idea what their password is. So, we're sort of helpless, which leads me to believe that there's a number of FRNs out there that really are somewhat dormant. Nobody knows about it. So when you implement this, will the FCC be taking the lead and notifying, I guess it would be whoever your FRN contact is, that there seems to be the same tax ID associated with a number of different FRNs, which leads us to, once again, you're notifying 3 different contacts, 2 of which are no longer with the company, and the third one is sort of doesn't remember that because he did it 8 years ago. So how does the rubber hit the road in this case?
It's interesting to bring that up because that's actually a question that's on my list that I wanted to pose to the audience as to what to do about what we call orphaned FRNs. And again, these are FRNs that may have been used in the past, but we can see that there hasn't been any activity on them for a certain amount of time. Maybe it's 5 years, 10 years. And in some cases, it may be that it was just used for one purpose, and then they, the entity used their primary FRN. In some cases, it may be that an entity or an individual just didn't remember their password for their first FRN and decided to create a new one, and so it was their initial FRN, which is now orphaned. And we actually think that's not uncommon. I mean, we think that in a number of cases, individuals prefer to create a new FRN because it's not too burdensome, as opposed to calling the help desk, the FCC help desk, who would then help you recover your initial password. Look, we've all been there, right? We all register for different websites, and then we re-access it 5 months later, and we can't remember our password. So we all do the same thing. We create new IDs, we re-register for the Washington Post or for CNN or something else. But you're absolutely right. That's a really important question, and it's an open question. Number one, how to identify them. Number two, how much time should we allow to pass before we start to act to close them, before we start to recognize that they are dormant, orphaned, as we would call them, and what process should we take to inform the original registrant that we are going to do this? Because you're absolutely right. Maybe it was created by someone who has left the entity, left the organization, and that's why there has been there's no activity on the FRN. And we're certainly open to suggestions as to those issues. Yes, ma'am.
I asked, can we delete old FRNs, and was told, no, not really. So that might be something to consider as well.
Right. Now, I think that we would have to pair up FRNs and FRN activity with the length of a particular license. If the service in which you have a license for is, let's say, a 5-year license, and there's been no activity on an FRN for 4 years, that isn't too unexpected. All right, but again, if you have to renew your license every year and there's been no activity on a particular FRN for 4 or 5 years, in that case, we might act differently. But you're right, these are the sorts of issues which we would have to try and work out. There are, I'm sure, many FRNs that are just out there that have been created for entities that no longer exist. Are there any more comments on what potential option to use with regard to entities before I move to individuals? Yes. What have you got? Thanks. I'd like this discussion to be as informal as possible, so just feel free just to raise your hand, and we'll just try and keep this as robust and freewheeling as possible, just to get the most benefit out of this discussion. All right, a question that we just received through WebEx. It's amazing when technology works. Back when I filed an ownership for a client in CDBS in Form 323, I was required to provide an FRN number for each officer of the company. Will this change with the new system, or how will these FRNs be linked together? I think she's talking about one of our special use FRNs, which need to be created to fill out some of our ownership reports. Now, one of the proposals that we mentioned in our NPRM, in our section when we discuss our 10 exception reasons and which ones to eliminate, we talk about these special use FRNs and the fact that in some instances around the agency, they're needed and used for filing some of these ownership reports. I think right now we are anticipating that that will continue, but a question that we raised in the NPRM is whether or not we can use this sort of concept of a special use FRN, that is an FRN that can be used for some purposes, but not all purposes at the agency, whether we should expand that to other avenues, to other situations. And we can talk about that now if you'd like. Does anyone have any comments on that?
the resistance of certain individuals to provide that tax ID number is very real. It's not real as far as a large percentage of the individuals, but it's very real as far as the rigidity of that select few who say, I know that Bank of America does not have a secure site. People are hacking into, trade accounts at stock brokerages and banks, and I'm sure that the FCC is not more secure than the Visa MasterCard site.
Yeah, we all know people like that. My father was like that. We understand that people are adamant about not providing Social Security numbers to the agency, but from our perspective, we have the DCIA is one of the federal statutes that we have to comply with, the Debt Collection Improvement Act. So we are required as an agency to collect Social Security numbers from everyone doing business with the agency. And all we can do from an agency perspective is do what Phil has been trying to do and just try and reassure people as best as possible about the steps that we're taking to protect those Social Security numbers and to keep them from accidental disclosure. So should we turn to individuals, whether individuals would need additional FRNs or additional sub-FRNs? Now this is a interesting issue from my perspective. Yes, ma'am?
Presumably they are attached to multiple FRNs. It would seem to me to make sense that if you send out notification to the FRN that is being dominantly used, hey, you have this dormant FRN, can we stick it into your account? That might be a way to handle that.
You would propose that the FCC identify the FRN from the same entity that is most used or most recently used and contact them and saying, look, we have this other FRN, we're just going to delete it. That would be your proposal.
You already have the information on what's dormant. And also, I know from the broadcast auxiliary update, the FCC created a lot of FRNs and associated them with stations or applications. So the licensee may not have any knowledge of this FRN and no way to get into it.
Okay. That's a very good point. Do we have any other comments on that? Yes. Thank you. Oh, that's interesting. Someone on the web has suggested that perhaps we should archive certain FRNs, maybe put them in suspend mode instead of actually deleting them. And I suppose that's an idea that we could float, that we could think about. So moving on to individuals. Now, intellectually, it would seem as though if you're an individual, let's say you hold an amateur license, you really wouldn't have the need for more than one FRN because you're just one individual. You don't have the need for a sub-FRN. But when we have just been thinking about this issue internally, we've thought about the issue which I raised before on the slide, in that there may be outside parties that do work for you, outside accountant, outside attorney, for example, who takes care of some of your filings at the agency, and you may wish for them to have either their own account and be able to access your FRN or a sub-FRN that's attached to your account. And that may be a reason to extend option 1 or option 2 to individuals as well. And we were wondering if anyone had any views about that. Now, one feature we could add to multiple FRNs or sub-FRNs for individuals was the one that we referred to earlier, which is to give one of those FRNs primary administrative rights, so that if you do allow a third party to access your information, perhaps they'd only be able to view it as opposed to enter information, may only be able to view certain information as opposed to all the information, or may only be able to make certain changes to that information. For example, you could envision that possibly you'd want an outside attorney to be able to make filings on your behalf but not be able to change your contact information. Any questions or comments on a single FRN for individuals? Okay. So now what about multiple contact points? Now we talked about the the proposal to allow entities and individuals to identify additional points of contact for their FRN. Again, currently, as you know, you can only have one contact in your FRN, which makes it difficult for us inside the agency when we need to contact you to settle some sort of issue. Maybe it's a billing issue, maybe it's a payment issue, and oftentimes we call some name that was on the FRN when it was registered 8 years ago, and that person has long left the agency, the phone number's wrong, and no one knows who's the right person anymore. Do you have a comment, sir? Okay. And so again, one of our proposals is to allow for additional contacts for each entity or individual for specific issues. One open question is whether or not the agency should, first of all, restrict the number of these additional contacts to a certain number, let's say 3 to 5, and whether or not they should be for specific categories of issues, or whether or not we should allow entities and individuals the ability to create their own categories of contacts. Does anybody have any thoughts on those issues? Sir, yes, no. One of the comments that we received during the initial comment period was from a large telecom. I can't remember offhand which one it was. It may have been Nextel, and they indicated that they think they can get by with between 3 and 5 contacts, even though they're an organization that has a huge number of licenses with the agency. Does anyone feel that 3 to 5 would be about the right number? More or less? 3 to 5, you agree? What about individuals? Do you think we should allow individuals the ability to create these additional contacts, or since they're just individuals, just go with one contact by themselves? Yes, ma'am.
Should we start over? I should think that they would need multiple contacts as well. If they need engineers or attorneys, they're going to need the multiple contacts.
Outside parties, I think that what you're thinking about, which would be contact directly. Now, in those cases, let me just ask you a follow-up question to that, ma'am. So let's say you have an individual who holds an amateur license, and they put down a third-party contact for a particular issue. Should there be an option that they should be able to check in which they would get somehow copied on that correspondence? So for example, if it was an outside party, an outside attorney we would be contacting, that they would be informed that we were going to take this route. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
This is a follow-up to what Phil said earlier for the verification of email. Like if you, now it's required, and it sounds like that it's going to send that email address, you know, an email that says click this for verification of your email. If I go in under a client, or I'm creating it for a client, is that client going to receive the email, or is the contact person going to receive the email? And sorry, can I not access it until the client's clicked on that email and verified the email address? I mean, am I making sense?
Well, what do you think would make the most sense to implement? Which way would you prefer?
I would think if you're going to have multiple areas for contacts, like if you have the primary information and then you have 3 areas, maybe having a checkbox off of, you know, verification, or who do you send the verification email address to, and make sure it's one of the ones that are listed.
Right, or maybe you send the verification link to whoever is trying to create an FRN, but there's an automatic notification that goes to the primary contact that just says someone is attempting to create a new FRN, and this is the person's name and what their phone number is.
Right, because what if you're waiting for the client to initiate it, and what if they're not there?
Okay, I think that's a good point. That's a good point. Anyone else? Okay, so we move on to our 10 exception reasons. As we discussed earlier, there are several 10 exception reasons. These are reasons where regular Ts don't have to submit to us their TIN or their EIN and registering for their FRN. And we're proposing to either eliminate some of them or to restrict some of them. And what the restriction would do would be essentially the FRN could then be used for certain purposes and not for other purposes. I think one of the examples has to do with tribal governments who use our FRN to access one of our systems in order to file comments to, I think, the cell tower system. I don't know the name of the system. But they would not be able to use that FRN for other purposes, such as to obtain licenses. Now, one of the ones that we are proposing to get rid of has to do with the foreign entities and the foreign individuals. And we are under the impression that foreign entities and foreign individuals, if they do not have an identification number that has been issued to them by the IRS, either have or should be able to have a similar number or number for a similar purpose from the comparable agency in their home country. And that's an issue that we would really appreciate any input that anybody could provide. Are there any attorneys here who represent foreign entities, or anyone who's familiar with some of the foreign entities that may have registered with us? Yes, sir.
As I was saying, potentially you're dealing with dozens or even more foreign jurisdictions. Each of them may have their own processes. Some of them may be confidential. Some of them, a company wouldn't want to disclose their tax ID number in Switzerland or the Cayman Islands or any places like that. And I'm also, I'm wondering if this might be beyond the jurisdiction of the FCC to request this information.
The reason why we would require this information would be the reasons which we alluded to earlier, which is really to discourage abuse of this exception, and people who are not foreign entities or people who are not foreign individuals abusing the system and claiming the use of that exception when they're really domestic. As we mentioned earlier, this is the most used exception that we have. Thousands upon thousands of individuals and companies have claimed it, and we really have no way of knowing whether or not these people are actually foreign entities, foreign individuals, or domestic. And so it's just a matter of fraud prevention more than anything else.
But it's not based on any conclusion about fraud having been committed. It's just you think that may be some of the problem?
Yes, exactly. Because of, I think, the Debt Collection Improvement Act, we're required to make sure that registrants do not owe debt to the government through some other agency, for example. And obviously there's a way, this is a possible loophole for people to avoid.
The CORES registration doesn't contain any kind of a certification. When you go in to set up your FRN, you're not asked to certify anything under penalty of perjury or the Title 18 warnings. It seems to me that you could address that issue by having people, if they're going to claim that exception, certify that in fact they're not required under federal law to have a taxpayer ID number.
Well, that's a good point. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments on that issue?
I believe that if a U.S. company was investing in a foreign corporation that did business with that foreign country's regulatory agency, and that foreign country required that this U.S. investor provide their Social Security or tax ID number, I don't think it would be well received here, and I think that certainly in entities such as Switzerland, Cayman Islands, etc., that their laws probably would prohibit mandatory disclosure of that type of information. And I think to follow up on what he said there, I think that we might not have the jurisdiction or the authority to do that.
Any other comments on that issue? Yes, ma'am.
If you were able to set it up, would there be a way to cross-check if it was actually a valid number?
That would certainly be an issue. Are there any other agencies collecting this sort of information? I'm just repeating the question for the web folks. Are there any other agencies collecting this sort of information from foreign entities or foreign individuals? We haven't looked into it. I don't know the answer to that, but that's a very good question and something which we should certainly look into for that very reason.
Propose the elimination of these exemptions to be retroactive, or just going forward?
Probably on going forward.
Exemptions, entities using exemptions now.
Do you have any thoughts on that? The purpose of this forum is just to get input. So, assuming that we do go ahead and eliminate this exception, which do you think would be the way to go?
I see problems either side.
Does anyone else have any comments about the proposal regarding the foreign entities and foreign individuals? What about some of our other proposals regarding other TIN exception reasons that are out there? We raised the issue regarding expanding the use of these special use FRNs to other contexts. That was one. I think there were a few others. Petitioners and non-feeable complainants. Should we maybe eliminate that exception reason or convert it to some sort of special use FRN status? Anyone? Okay, so let's change the issues here for a moment and talk about mandatory email addresses. I've gotten the impression this is an important issue for some of you. Should we make the provision of email addresses mandatory? And what about for individuals? Yes, ma'am.
We still have to fax and fax and mail to them. They don't want to touch a computer. They don't want to have anything to do with it, and they do not have email addresses. Am I a volunteer coordinator? No. I'm a paralegal in a law firm. I'm a paralegal in a law firm.
Individuals or are they entities?
Individuals, and they have companies, but they don't have email addresses. They just don't want them.
Okay. Well, to what extent do you think that in this day and age that there are people who either don't have email addresses or don't want to release them to us? You think this is a widespread problem, or there are just assorted cases?
I really couldn't say. Mostly we're talking, about the small mom and pops who, don't want to keep or maintain an email, don't want to have the influx, or maybe afraid of what that influx of email might bring them.
Now, we recognize that there may be people, individuals, who don't have email and therefore has someone to help them create their FRN and their account with the FCC on their behalf. What would you think about, I'm just throwing out ideas here, what would you think about the proposal of if an individual creates an FRN on their own behalf electronically, they would have to provide their email address because obviously they would most likely have one, although I suppose they could do it from a library. But if they were to get a third party to register for them, that perhaps there would be an exception for them. Because those obviously would be the types of people who don't have their own email address. Someone else, a law firm, a coordinator, to create an FRN on their behalf.
Were you not already discussing having a separate contact anyway for FRNs? And that would probably resolve that issue unless it's an individual. Well, and if it's an individual, they're registering on their own, so it's probably not an issue.
Now, what about requiring email addresses for entities? Do people generally support this idea or against this idea? I see some nods.
It's pretty easy. I could probably set up an email account for myself by using my iPhone right now. So it's not really that there isn't a technology burden to it's pretty simple to obtain one, and I think a lot of most of the people doing business before.
Maybe a checkbox. They would check off saying, "Do not contact me by email."
Right, but I think the default in most cases would be
interesting. Okay, and if you were having a third party take care of your registration for you, obviously they would just check the box, and therefore you wouldn't have to provide an email address. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Thank you. The comment that we have from the web is they think that we should require an email address because if for some reason there is a red light issued, we'd need to track back. I guess the agency would need to track back who did not make the correct payment, and the best way to do that is through email. Should we move on? All right, let's talk about, if you want, our proposals to add 2 indicators into the system. The one that would allow entities and individuals to indicate their tax-exempt status, and the second one, their bankruptcy status. Does anyone have any thoughts or opinions on either one of those? Well, would it be burdensome to entities to have to provide us with some sort of documentation which evidences their bankruptcy status, possibly by taking a court filing and scanning it into their system and emailing it to us through CORES? Is that something we should be focusing on, or would that be too burdensome for entities? Anyone? No comment?
Accomplishes a lot of its filing requirements on the basis of declarations. When you file an application and you're certifying compliance with the Drug Enforcement Improvement Act, you're not providing any other supporting documentation, obviously. You're just signing the certification under penalty of perjury. And then nobody at the other end needs to register it. And if there's an issue down the road, then there's a problem with perjury. In connection, you made a comment earlier about entities who are exempt. Entities who are in bankruptcy asking for relief from the application filing requirements. If you adopt this box where you can certify or provide documentation that you are in fact in bankruptcy, would the Commission consider giving those people a blanket exemption from application fees, rather than require that they request it on a case-by-case basis?
I certainly couldn't answer it, but I would certainly pass it on to our financial office. Yes, ma'am.
Would that box, would that make it so you didn't have to create taxpayer or FRN numbers when they go into that exemption? Do you still have to create a whole, right?
I don't know the answer to that. What do you think?
It'd be nice to have to.
Create a new one?
And then when they come out, or if they come out or whatever, then you go in and
Right.
because then you're having multiple FRNs.
Exactly, which may just disappear again in the future. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say we went with this proposal and allowed entities and individuals to just check a box certifying their bankruptcy status. Should we restrict the ability to check that box to create the certification to the primary account holder? Or should we allow the FRN holder to designate a particular user as the sole party permitted to either check or uncheck that box? What do you think? Either one will work.
As long as they're a duly representative or an officer.
Right. It just seems to me, again, just thinking off the top of my head, that not doing something along those lines would be a potential avenue for mischief from a disgruntled employee. They go in and they check or uncheck a box just because they have access to your FRN. And it may be, assuming that we would adopt something along those lines, it would be beneficial to everyone involved, both us and the entity, to just restrict the ability to alter that information to just one or two individuals. So that may be actually a case where entities may want to create a new contact box just for a contact solely to discuss the bankruptcy status, right?
If we decide to go with this certification in the number of contacts for ownership, for example, bankruptcy status, maybe that would limit the ability for the person making the registration CORES, the primary account holder, to actually be the one who's signing the certification, and they alone be able to add additional points on.
Right. Maybe again, what would you think about the idea, again, just thinking off the top of my head, once you check that box, which says we certify that where we've entered bankruptcy proceedings, at that point, a dialog box pops up and it says, please enter in a contact name and contact information for the person that the agency can talk to you to discuss your certification of your bankruptcy status. And that other than that point, that box would not appear and you wouldn't have the option of creating a contact solely for bankruptcy issues until you check that box.
I think that's a good idea.
Anyone else have any other opinion on that? Okay. Now what about the dashboard? Jim spoke at length about the opportunity that we would have here at the agency to create a company-centric dashboard once you enter CORES that would list all of your holdings throughout the entire agency, throughout all of our currently independent filing systems, and learn all sorts of information about them, such as when your license may expire, maybe if you have past dues that are owed to the agency. Are there any specific sorts of information which you all would appreciate being to pop up in that dashboard? Is there anything that comes to your mind of really information which you'd love to see when you first enter CORES before you branch out and go into one of these other licensing systems? Yes, ma'am. Red light status.
Yes, quite often now, there may be an FRN that's associated that goes in red light status, and the licensee has no notification of it until it's already over at Treasury.
Is the red light status an issue in which you would like the ability for a primary FRN holder to restrict the ability of other users to actually see?
I don't know. It sounds like it might be something that the main holder would want. I can't speak to it.
Anyone have any other thoughts about the? Yes, sir.
There are lots of regulatory requirements, not fee requirements, regulatory filing requirements of various miscellaneous kinds, like the hearing aid compatibility filing, 499 filings. There's probably a dozen or two. And at the risk of making your database overly complicated at this point, when you buy something on a website, often they'll ask you if you want updates about, different categories of services they offer. If the primary account holder would have that same ability to be reminded of the upcoming hack deadline by checking the box or license renewals, or I think that'd be very helpful in helping people not overlook those filing deadlines.
That's a good point. Yes. Thank you.
One more is coming.
There's someone who wants to see the red light status also, and to be able to check on it each day to see if there's any change. You said there's another coming? Yes. I think this one's from my wife. Thank you. Here's someone who wants to see all of our company's licenses on the dashboard, again, that someone mentioned, and not to have to search multiple databases or sites on the FCC site. Exactly, and that's what we envision we will do with the dashboard once we have it up and running. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. With the red light issue, I don't know if you can create something that would show fees outstanding, like if you filed an application and you haven't paid yet or something that comes up under your FRN number. I know somebody I worked with filed something on IBFS, and that's kind of an archaic system, and they didn't go to the fee filing thing, and they didn't realize they had to file something, you know, that they were missing the fee payment. So, I mean, I don't know if you can do it, but if you're doing the red light thing or trying to get the red light thing on the dashboard, maybe outstanding fees for application fees or something, or, I mean, I know we have a 14-day, anyway. Just a thought.
And on the interconnectivity of all the systems, right? Right, it's a good idea. Does anyone have any security concerns about the dashboard system, of someone maybe trying to hack into your system and getting the access to this this baseline information about your firm, even if they can't get into the actual underlying systems? There be any concerns about that?
Really, because right now, if you enter an FRN, you can see all the licenses. You know, you might have to log on to CDBS and then log on to ULS and then log on to the other licensing systems. But as far as which licenses are associated with a given FRN, GenMen sort of does that. So I don't see that much of a problem. I would hope that you'll discuss more about that idea of allow users to access multiple FRNs with one login. Sort of, I think that would be something that our firm might or might not do. So we would log in as the law firm, and we would see all of our clients' FRNs, and that link would be governed by each of our clients, whether or not.
I mean, conceptually, the idea is that you would have an FRN, and once you enter it with your own password, it would give you access to all of your clients' information. You have a user.
So then I could log in and see all of my clients' FRNs and log in that way, or my client could log in using their own FRN and password.
They would continue to have primary administrative rights. So, for example, let's say you terminate your relationship with the company, they'd be able to terminate your access to their information without you having to change anything about your FRN.
And I would do this without ever actually using their FRN password combination?
Conceptually, that's what would happen. Whether or not that could actually be accomplished might be a different issue.
Could employees of a company access the dashboard concurrently?
I don't think there's any technological impediment to that. Would you have a preference one way or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Same with law firms.
You'd want them to be able to access it simultaneously?
Want one person to be able to get into a dashboard account.
Okay. Okay. Would there be a limit, Corey? Do you know?
The dashboard concept is actually something that is part of the CLS discussion. So CORES is certainly a piece of that in accessing things, but you know, we're not talking about implementing things that are, you know, single user processes here. Certain processes may be, certain processes would not be. I'm not involved in the CLS design, and I don't want to get into that in detail, but we're talking about right now with CORES providing access from an individual's user ID that's associated with an individual person and letting them get into multiple accounts without having to exactly share the FRN and password. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And then once you get in and you have access to those accounts, what can you do beyond that? Well, that's going to be probably outside of CORES.
Thanks, Corey. Okay, I've now gotten through all the issues I wanted to touch upon, so let me just open everything up to you, the audience. Are there any issues specifically you want to return to, or anything else you want to raise as a potential feature for the new CORES or the CORES CLS hybrid that you'd like to comment on? Yes, sir.
My understanding is that there's an exemption for supplying the EIN. When you apply, you can say EIN applied for when you're setting it up. Is there a way to, I mean, will we implement a way to supply that after it's provided by the IRS?
Yes, you know, as a matter of fact, that's one of the proposals that we touch upon in the NPRM right now. Currently, if you check the box for the exception that says, look, we don't have an EIN, but it's been applied for, or TIN, it's been applied for, a problem that we have is that we never go back and double check. And so essentially that exception lasts forever, and that shouldn't be the case. We think that individuals and entities should have a time limit for which they have to provide us with TIN or EIN, or that temporary FRN will be deleted or put in some sort of stasis until they actually do provide that information. And one of the questions we raise in the NPRM is, how much time is reasonable to allow individuals and entities to receive these numbers from the IRS, not having any experience with them ourselves, as to how much time they usually take before that process gets completed. But to go directly to your question, there would be some sort of methodology in place in which you would then submit the number to us after the fact. So on that point, does anyone have any comments as to the amount of time we should give entities or individuals to provide us with their TIN or EIN? Why don't you go ahead, Corey?
One question I was hoping to hear a little bit more about is to have some people describe how they use contacts, to give us a little bit more information about what contacts they enter, what contact. CORES currently limits you to just one contact. So what do you put in CORES now? What do you use elsewhere? What would you want to be there if we do give you the option of having more than one contact? What is your relationship in terms of if you have clients, you have people who represent you, do they change? Do they change representatives frequently? How often? I was hoping to hear some things about this. How often contacts change? How do you maintain contacts? At what points in time do we need to review contacts to make sure that they're accurate? This sort of information is kind of what I was hoping to get some feedback.
As far as CORES contact, my observation is that that is probably the most stagnant aspect. In other words, when we take representation of a client, we will update CDBS or ULS or the IBFS system. We'll replace our firm, with the previous firm with our firm as far as the contact is concerned. But as far as CORES is concerned, we just make sure we know not always, but most of the time, we just make sure we know the CORES password and, FRN and password, and we don't always necessarily go back in and change the contact, because the contact is generally done on an application basis. If there's ever an issue with this particular license or this application, the FCC contacts the contacts listed in the application. So, and as far as who's listed as a contact, that's done on a case-by-case basis. When we set up an FRN for a client, we'll ask them, do you want to be the contact, or would you like the FCC to contact us? And we just go by their wishes.
Yes, sir. You had a question. Oh, can you hold on one second? Can we have a microphone over here?
Oh, well, real quick, I would say that it would be nice to have a place where you have a direct contact and a, because most things you have the licensee as well as you have a contact. But on the FRN, you only have the one box. And if we put in the attorney's address there so that it comes to us, then if you go to pay a fee, it's our address and not their address, it gets complex. So if there was two boxes, one for the licensee, one for the contact on the FRN, I think that would be better.
Okay. Here, sir.
Thank you. Another possible contact is the engineer. We haven't really discussed that. They sometimes questions go, you would probably be better off directing a question directly to the engineer.
Absolutely. I think engineer is one of the pre-filled contacts that we propose in the NPRM that would just be there to be filled out by every entity and every individual. Are there any other questions or comments on any issue that pertains to these potential CORES changes that anyone would like to raise? Yes, ma'am.
It has to do with some of the getting back to the exempted activities where you say you have an FRN pending. I know when you go to say, yes, we do have one, you have to do a formal letter, send in a letter on letterhead, this is our FRN. There's been occasions when some of us with dyslexic issues may enter the 10 wrong, and you can't just go in and change that. Why is that not editable? I mean, but you put the number in,
Yeah, but
and you have the password.
But you can write a letter, or they have a form that you can go, because I've had issues where a number is wrong, or they've actually had an entity that had multiple names or multiple taxpayer identification numbers, and it was wrong. I mean, so.
Oh, no, I understand sometimes it gets complex, but I should think that if you can put in the number yourself to begin with, and you note that you made an error, you shouldn't have to incur a whole bunch of extra legal costs just to correct that error.
Let's wait for the microphone.
The reason this program, the way it is to prevent people from doing assignments of license effectively by just changing the EIN in their FRN record.
Yes. Oh, great. Here's the question. Regarding acquisitions, mergers, and transfers of controls, will these now be handled through CORES since the financial and demographic information will reside in CORES? I don't know the answer to that. I think it depends on our internal controls more than anything else. Does anyone have any opinions?
When you go into, I don't know, you probably already have done all this design work, and the last thing you want to do is go back and reinvent the wheel. But when you go into Amazon, for example, and you're buying something or and having it shipped, when you get to that part of your checkout, it asks you if you have multiple shipment addresses you've used in the past, which one do you want to use? And if you have multiple credit cards, which one do you want to use? If you have all this information residing in CORES, which should be the master repository, and then you go into CLS and you want to do an assignment application, it could give you the option when you get to that box, do you want to use any of your existing 6 contacts in CORES as the contact person for this?
I gotcha. That's a good idea. Regarding the search capability of CORES, does anyone think that for publicly held entities, we should have a box either allowing them or requiring them to enter their stock ticker abbreviation so that searches can be done on that basis? Why not? Right, it would just be a matter of a question as to whether or not that would improve the use of the system for anything that it might be used for. Anyone else have any other opinion on that? Any other questions, comments, issues? Okay, then thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate the time and we appreciate the comments. And again, feel free to file reply comments. They're due in about, I think, 8 days.